Greetings, teachers. It's November 16th, 2023. If you're here in Portland, then you're on strike if you're a teacher, unless it's that you don't teach in a public school. You might teach in a private school and you might not be on strike right now. But let's say you are and you're looking around for professional development opportunities and you stumble across this podcast where this guy Kirby, whoever he is talking about updating the curriculum. While we're at it, it's always updating, right? It's not curriculum, it's not like radical to talk about updating the curriculum because history keeps flowing by, right? We're into the future compared to the past. That's a truism. So I'm going to talk about Margaret Fuller and Ada Byron. And these could be figures in your American history and literature courses that you're teaching. You're the teacher. You're in a high school, let's say, or you're in advanced elementary school. Who knows exactly? You might be college. We don't need to have to pinpoint that. We don't have to agree on that. You might not even really be a teacher. You're just lurking here. You're listening in, right? So I'm updating these teachers from the background of I had a pretty good education. I went to Princeton, I went to international schools, but still, I don't have the up-to-date info on everything. It has to be created because the future rolls forward. We can't just keep teaching the same stuff year after year. Some teachers think we can in math at least. That doesn't change, especially early math. Like high school level math, it's not going to have any change, big ones. That's an assumption. I'm not saying it's true. In fact, I'm saying it's not true in other videos in this channel. But in the literary side of things and history side of things, of course, we're always going to need to update. So I'm going to be updating using these slides that you've seen before. I keep adding to them. This is not my dimension in synergetics quest slide deck. That's another one that I often harp on here in this channel and have really invited people to use as theirs, to do the deck their way and maybe let me know and spread the word that way about this content. Now, what I want to do with this slide deck, I haven't thought it through as much, but I do know I want to keep adding slides. It's easy to do. So this is not a static deck. And a picture that I've added recently, and I've been going backwards, this one. Okay, so we're looking lower left, lower right, and we're seeing Ada Byron and Margaret Fuller, and they live almost exactly the same time frame. From like 1810, 1815 till the mid-1800s. They both die young. We need to figure out why in each case. I won't tell their whole biographies here. I want to say these women, who are kind of contemporaries of Napoleon to some degree, they're like overlapping the founding fathers. They're still in the first generation. Remember, 1776. We're still in the early pre-Civil War United States history, and they feel that. They don't know exactly what's the meaning of this revolution we just recently had, but it's been reflected. Back in Europe, there's been a French Revolution in late 1700s, like 1798 and like that. So that's already in the rearview mirror, and then Napoleon comes along and starts. It's a paradox because he's being an emperor and yet he's supposedly spreading enlightenment values. But there's an oxymoron here. If you mean democracy, how can you have like one tyrant in control? But that's a whole discussion. And the founding fathers were having that discussion, and this is stuff we actually already go over in our high school curriculum. We talk about this stuff. How did Jefferson and Hamilton see Napoleon? It all has to do with Louisiana Purchase and whose side are we on? Because we just fought a revolution against Britain. So you kind of by definition have to say Britain's an enemy. Otherwise, what was all that shooting and killing about? Is that what you do with your friends? Is that how? But on the other hand, it's culturally, they speak English. There's things about the British that feel close to the heart in terms of early America, which is beyond 13 states by now. Way beyond, but it's not to the coast yet. So when I say yet, what time frame? I'm back to 1810. Margaret and Ada are young, and then as their lives go forward, the U.S. expands westward, and Margaret actually makes a trip out to the far west fringe. And she hangs out with Native Americans, and she explores the country. She's a real adventurous, a doer. So whereas the transcendentalists she hangs out with back in Boston are really good at talking, and she's like better than they are. Here's what happened. Her dad started educating her at a very young age, and she took to it. It wasn't like she didn't want to do that. She did find the attraction in all these books. They pulled her in. It's not like she did it just to make her dad proud or some other motive. She actually got sucked in. At a very young age, she found she could read all these old languages. Over time, she could. Right? She really stuck to it. She really loved scholar life, like reading and all that. So she was sort of hell-bent on that track for whatever reason. So the idea that she was just going to like become a typical like married housewife in the near future, that was not going to fit her profile hardly. Now jump to Ada, she's kind of the same way, but in her case, her mom didn't want her to go to be a crazy like her dad was, her dad being Lord Byron, the great romantic poet. And I'm going to insert kind of sideways here about the Romantic period, because remember the context here is like high school curriculum, right? So we're trying to talk about the Romantics, the poets, and we'll take Coleridge, for example. And the way we tell it is usually often anyway, Coleridge gets all this German idealism coming from Kant and like rethinks what he thinks, and we get this branch inside of England and inside the English language in the poetic tradition that rolls forward from Coleridge to like Emerson to transcendentalism. And it really takes over at Harvard a lot. Like German idealism comes over to Harvard and basically pushes enough people sideways that they go from being Unitarians to Transcendentalists. And even going from Trinitarians to Unitarians was a big step. That was a big theological move in the history of Christian thought. So we have these Unitarians, and they're quite powerful at this point in the arc, their arc. Quakers less so, but Quakers are similar in their outlook. And when we talk about Unitarians, you can often just swap in the Quakers and it'll fit in terms of values and things they're going through and so forth. But what happens is the Unitarians, some of them, Emerson in particular, he drops being a minister and he goes out to be this new kind of like, I don't know, self-help guru, a new kind of orator in a way, where it's still about spiritual depths, it's still about the deep stuff, but it's not branding itself as a religion so much as a philosophy. And if we go forward, like to William James and his approach, the academic study of these lineages, it's like there are a lot of ways towards spiritual subjects that aren't the religious brands, right? You can go through a more academic lens, or you can do like a philosophy that doesn't proclaim itself as a religion so much. Like a lot of people argue that Zen Buddhism, it better consider it a type of psychology like Gestalt psychology, and don't compare it to like a religion. These kind of conversations go on, categorization of these lineages. But you'll see in the literature that there's the usual debates about whether, in going from Unitarian to Transcendentalist, are we going from a religion to a philosophy, or from a religion to another religion, or what? And then forward from Transcendentalism, you've got this whole story unfolding from there. And I don't talk about that so much right now. I want to just stick back to our where we're going with this, right? So Ada and Margaret. Margaret, what I've just told you already is part of the curriculum. Ada, she's not an American. She's maybe not usually talked about in American literature, but definitely you want to bring her in. Partly because she's got the reputation now for being the first programmer, or like the mother of programming, or the mother of software, computer software, or something on that order. And she was very much a polymath. She was being educated to not be like her dad, Lord Byron, the romantic. That's kind of where I took off on that long tangent. But people looked askance at him and his lifestyle. What romantic means is that's kind of what you want to dive into, actually, and we haven't really yet. But in brief, it doesn't really have so much to do with like romance novels or love stories the way you might think romantic means, Romeo and Juliet. There might be elements of that for sure, but in this context, we really more mean anti-industrial aesthetics. Like factories are popping up everywhere and people are being exploited. They're flooding into the cities for menial factory jobs. They're living in crowded, terrible conditions. There's a lot of disease and child exploitation. It's just a mess. And here's the thing. It seems that you can say that women were maybe not as pessimistic as the men at this point. Like the romantics were in a reaction against industrialization, but there was some of the males were like not in that. They're like, this is great. This is going to go somewhere good. It's ugly right now, very ugly. But that's not the fault of our new knowledge about how to do steam engines and electricity and going forward radio and so on. Like this is good technology that we can make good use of. And there's optimism there, and they're looking for sort of their female allies and counterparts. And a couple of them, these very educated Ada and Margaret Fuller, are kind of like that. They're not necessarily put off by what they're seeing as coming over the horizon, what the future bears, what the future holds. They're not as much in reaction against industrialization as the standard sort of stereotypical romantic. And that's kind of what pushes us into transcendentalism partly. And going forward from there into, say, Bucky Fuller, the grandnephew of Margaret Fuller, will focus on his focus on the Equal Rights Amendment and his feeling that the long arc here is back to women riding the balance. Like they're not so pessimistic, but it's partly because they see they're going to gain more control. It's only a matter of time before women get the vote, is what I think they're both thinking. I think that's what everyone's thinking. It's just when, where, how are we going to get there? Who's going to like push the needle forward or whatever needs to be pushed? So there's the suffragist movement. There's a lot that has to happen. But women are growing in power, and the women can sense this, and maybe therefore they're not as put off by the rapid pace of change, which, yes, if it kept going the way it was going to just be ugly. But was it going to keep going the way it was going? That was the question. And Ada and Margaret, feminists, you could say prototypical, highly educated. They both ended up getting married, by the way, in different circumstances. But that didn't have to happen, right? And the whole exploration of non-heterosexual relationships and all this kind of stuff, they're open to that. That's all in the thought, even at this point in history. So in terms of your existing standard curriculum, I'm saying here's where you can advance the needle on your side to incorporate, what are we triangulating? We're going towards the present time and talking about what happened since then the Civil War comes along, and then out to the West Coast. I'm going to pick up on the story of Sam Hill for the benefit of my Silicon Forest audience, but even there, you might want to stick around. I'll have a link to his story at the end of this video. I've done most of these slides already have their echoes going back. There's like 800, there's an echo chamber you've walked into of like 800 YouTubes, all talking about bits and pieces of a certain sort of matrix. And where I've been a lot is on the other side of the fence, CP Snow Chasm, here in the math sciencey kind of stuff. And Ada and Margaret Fuller, Ada especially, is going to help us cross that bridge as well. Because, and Margaret is more like the anthropologist, the A in STEAM. STEM, add the A. I say that A is for anthropology. And that's our bridge to PATH, philosophy, anthropology, theater, and history. And over here, we are able to accept, say, Bucky Fuller in connection with, say, the American pragmatists. We'll talk about that relationship. And Roy D. Kaufman, these people that I've got here in the slides, and we'll have sort of the usual liberal arts. The liberal arts will roll forward with these figures that people have been leaving out of accounts, which means the curriculum has been getting stale, and so I hope you agree with me that this is getting somewhere interesting. And if you're new to the channel, you might want to check out some of the mathy, sciencey stuff. Like, it's all, like a lot of it, most of it's free here out on GitHub and stuff, where we play around with some newfangled but highly accessible mathematics that goes with what happened next after the as we roll into the age of World's Fairs and Epcot and that kind of stuff. Disney, you got to have Disney in your story. That's one of your benchmarks. And I'm not just saying how well are they doing at the box office. I'm talking about Walt Disney. I'm talking about history now includes everything up through actually now. But it's now that keeps rolling forward, as you know, so there's always more to tell. So I hope this was interesting, and we'll be back. I have more to say, believe you me.